She doesn't even know what day it is, Your Honor. She can barely dress herself. My stepmother said that, without blinking. She sat 3 feet away from me in that courtroom, wearing my late father's credit card on her wrist. The Cartier watch he'd bought her 2 Christmases ago. And she told the judge I was mentally unfit. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I folded my hands in my lap and silently counted. 14. That's how many days she had left before she lost everything she'd ever stolen from my family. Be honest with me. Have you ever sat in a room full of people who were supposed to love you and watched each one of them believe a lie about you? Comment below if you know this feeling. I want to know how many of us have been through this, because that morning in courtroom 4B of the Harris County Probate Court in Houston, Texas, I was surrounded by people who shared my last name, and not one of them was in my corner. My stepmother, Diane, entered my life when I was 11. She married my father 8 months after my mother died of pancreatic cancer. She arrived with blonde highlights, a real estate license she'd never used, and a smile that could charm the chrome off a bumper. My father, God rest his soul, was a good man drowning in grief, and Diane threw him a rope that turned out to be a leash. For 17 years, she controlled him. She isolated him from his brother, his college friends, anyone who might tell him the truth, that Diane didn't love him. Diane loved his investment portfolio. She loved the 4-bedroom house in River Oaks. She loved the lake house in Conroe. She loved the quarterly dividends from the commercial real estate trust my grandfather built from the ground up in 1974. And then, 14 months ago, my father had a stroke. He died in the ICU at Houston Methodist Hospital at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I held his hand. Diane was in the waiting room, on the phone with his financial advisor. Within a week of the funeral, I learned 3 things. First, my father had updated his will 18 months before his death. He left the house to Diane, but the trust, roughly $4.2 million in commercial real estate and investment accounts, he left entirely to me. Second, Diane had known about this change for exactly 4 months because she'd gone through his desk while he was at a cardiologist appointment and found a draft. Third, and this changed everything, Diane had spent those 4 months slowly draining money from the trust's operating account. Not huge sums, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, enough to fund a lifestyle she knew was about to end, but not enough to trigger an automatic review. By the time my father died, she had transferred just over $310,000 into accounts I couldn't see. So, what would most people do? Most people would scream. Most people would hire a lawyer, file a lawsuit, post about it on social media, and call every relative in the phone book. Most people would react emotionally. And that's exactly what Diane was counting on. Because Diane didn't just steal money. Diane had a plan. If I reacted emotionally, if I started accusing, if I fell apart in front of the family, she would point to my behavior and say, "See? She's unstable. She's paranoid. She can't manage an estate. She needed me to look crazy." This was phase 2 of the theft. First, take the money. Then, take the credibility. Without credibility, nobody will believe you when you say the money is gone. It's a tactic straight out of the narcissist playbook. They don't just hurt you. They set things up so that when you try to tell someone, You sound like a lunatic." So I didn't react. I did the opposite. I became invisible. I moved out of the apartment my father had paid for and into an $800 a month studio in Montrose. I drove my 10-year-old Civic. I wore jeans and t-shirts. I told no one about what I'd discovered. I went to family dinners. I smiled at Diane across the table. I let her pat my hand and say, "Your father would have wanted us to stay close, sweetie." And every night after everyone went home, I'd sit at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of black coffee, and I traced every dollar she'd touched. See, here's what Diane didn't know about me. She thought I was a mid-level analyst at an accounting firm. Boring job, boring girl, boring life. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 6 years doing forensic audits at a firm that specialized in fraud detection. I'd helped the IRS build cases against people far smarter than Diane. My entire career was about following money through dark corridors until I found the room where it hid. She wasn't stealing from a grieving daughter. She was stealing from a professional. But I didn't just need evidence. I needed her to hang herself with her own rope. So, I let her keep stealing. I watched the transfers in real time. I documented each one with timestamps, IP addresses, and device IDs. I cross-referenced the recipient accounts with corporate filings in Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware. She'd created 3 shell companies, always 3, like they teach you in those fraud seminars. One was called Bluebird Properties LLC. Another, Gulf Horizon Consulting. The third, and this almost made me laugh, was called Legacy Asset Management. She named her instrument of theft Legacy. The irony was thick enough to choke on. For 5 months, I watched, I gathered. I built a file a federal prosecutor would weep with joy over, and I waited. Then Diane made her move. She filed an emergency petition for guardianship, claiming I was mentally incapacitated and unable to manage the trust. She produced a psychologist, a man named Dr. Edwin Marsh, who, as it turned out, was a golf buddy of her boyfriend's. He submitted a report written without ever examining me. He diagnosed me with severe dissociative disorder and cognitive decline based on what Diane had told him over the phone. Over the phone. He had never seen me, never examined me. He wrote a clinical diagnosis for a woman he'd never met, based on the word of the woman who was robbing her. And that's how I found myself in courtroom 4B on a Wednesday morning in January, listening to my stepmother describe me as if I were a broken appliance that needed to be unplugged. "She's missing bill payments," Diane told Judge Otterman, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she'd pre-crumpled in her purse for effect. "She forgets conversations. She calls me at 2 a.m. in a panic, not knowing where she is. I'm terrified for her, Your Honor. I made her father a promise that I would take care of her, and I intend to keep it." Behind her, the gallery was packed. My father's sister, Aunt Colette, was there with her 2 daughters. A woman I didn't recognize, who I later learned was Diane's hairstylist, brought in solely to fill a seat. All of them nodding as if watching a TED Talk. Diane had been working them for months. Phone calls, lunches, tearful voicemails about how worried she was about me. She'd turned my family into an audience, and now she was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her attorney, a man named Curtis Hamley, in a suit a size too small, stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, We request the immediate appointment of Mrs. Diane Calloway as temporary guardian of the estate of the late Robert Calloway, specifically the Calloway Family Trust, to prevent further financial deterioration caused by the respondent's inability to manage her affairs. Judge Alderman looked at me over his reading glasses. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the face of a man who had seen 1,000 liars and was tired of every single one of them. "Miss Calloway," he said, "this is a serious allegation. Your stepmother claims you are unable to care for yourself or manage your finances. What is your response?" The room fell silent. Diane leaned forward. Curtis clicked his pen. Aunt Colette held her breath. Everyone waited for a meltdown. They wanted tears. They wanted confusion. They wanted to see the helpless little girl Diane had described. I stood up slowly, buttoned my blazer, and looked directly at Diane. Not at the judge, not at the gallery, at her. I held her gaze for 3 full seconds, unblinking. In psychology, it's called a dominance display. It's what you do when you want someone to feel in their gut that you are not afraid of them. Then I turned to the judge and said, "I'll be listening, Your Honor. I just want to make sure my stepmother is finished. I wouldn't want to interrupt her while she's still under oath." Diane's lip twitched. It was quick, a quarter of a second, but I saw it. She felt the ground shift beneath her. She didn't understand why yet, but she felt it. Curtis recovered quickly. "Your Honor, we have documentation, financial records showing systematic negligence and mismanagement." He handed a file to the bailiff. "The trust's operating account has lost over $310,000 in the past 11 months. Transfers to unknown entities have been discovered. No oversight, no accountability. If that isn't proof of incapacity, I don't know what is." Judge Alderman flipped through the pages. His expression hadn't changed, but his pen had stopped moving. That's a telling sign. When a judge stops writing, something has caught his attention. Diane interjected, unable to help herself. "She doesn't even check her statements, Your Honor. I had to discover this myself. $300,000 gone, and she has no idea what kind of person loses that much money without noticing." A murmur went through the gallery. Aunt Colette whispered something to her daughter. Gerald shook his head. In their minds, the case was already closed. Poor, incapable girl. Good thing Diane was there to save the day. I let the silence hang for exactly 5 seconds. Long enough for the room to cement its assumptions. Long enough for Diane to feel secure. Then I said, "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Judge Alderman nodded. I picked up the black folder from the table. It was thick, 200 pages. I'd tabbed it with color-coded sticky notes. Red for financial documents, blue for digital forensics, green for corporate filings, yellow for perjury. I didn't just lose track of $310,000, Your Honor, I said, placing the folder in front of him. I tracked every dollar that left. I know exactly where it went, when it went, and who sent it. Diane's face didn't move, but her hands betrayed her. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. I opened the first red tab. This is proof of bank transfers from the trust's operating account, I explained. In the past 11 months, there have been 47 separate transfers to 3 different limited liability companies. Bluebird Properties, Golf Horizon Consulting, and Legacy Asset Management. I paused and looked at Diane. All 3 companies were registered in Wyoming through a registered agent service. The articles of incorporation list a nominee director, but the beneficial owner, the person who actually controls the bank accounts, is listed in confidential Wyoming Secretary of State filings. Curtis jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is beyond the scope." I continued. The beneficial owner of all 3 shell companies is Diane Marie Calloway, my stepmother. The woman sitting right here, asking you to give her control of money she's already stealing. The room erupted. Aunt Colette gasped so loudly the echo reverberated through the gallery. Gerald leaned forward. Diane's hairstylist looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Curtis was talking, but no one was listening. "That's a lie," Diane snapped, breaking character for the first time. "She fabricated it. She's delusional. This is what I told you about. She's paranoid and makes things up." Judge Alderman raised his hand. Silence fell over the room. He looked at Diane with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was the look of a man who had just realized he was being used as a weapon. He turned to me. "Please continue, Miss Calloway." I flipped to the blue tab. "These are the IP logs for each transfer," I said. "Each one was made from the same device, a Dell Inspiron laptop registered to the home network at 1847 Willow Creek. That's my stepmother's home address, the same house my father left her in his will." Curtis tried again. "Your Honor, this evidence has not been properly—" I flipped to the green tab and continued, because I wasn't finished, and Curtis knew it. "Here are the bank statements for the 3 shell companies. You'll notice a pattern. Funds come in from the trust, sit for 30 to 60 days, and are then transferred again to a cash brokerage account at Charles Schwab. That brokerage account is jointly held by Diane Calloway and a man named Trevor Fisk." I looked at Diane. "Would you like to tell the judge who Trevor Fisk is, or should I?" Diane remained silent. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like a fish out of water. "Trevor Fisk," I continued, "is a real estate agent from Galveston. He and my stepmother have been involved for approximately 3 years. It began when my father was still alive, when he was recovering from his first heart attack. Furthermore, I have hotel receipts, text message records obtained through lawful discovery, and a lease agreement for an oceanfront condo in Galveston signed by both of them. A condo purchased with money stolen from my father's trust." The room was absolutely silent. Not the awkward silence from before. This was the silence of people reevaluating everything they thought they knew. Aunt Colette had tears in her eyes. She wasn't looking at Diane. She was looking at me. And for the first time in over a year, there was shame in her eyes. Judge Alderman closed the folder. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Then he turned to Diane and Curtis with an expression that could freeze the Gulf of Mexico. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, his voice quiet and controlled, "you filed this guardianship petition knowing that it was you who made these transfers." Curtis grabbed Diane's arm. "Don't answer that." But Diane was already losing control. She couldn't stop herself. "It's not what it looks like," she blurted out. "I was managing the funds. Robert told me to. He gave me power before he died. He wanted me to—" "He wanted you not to," I corrected. "I can prove it." I opened the yellow tab. This was the part I'd saved, the part that turned a civil case into a criminal one. "My stepmother submitted a document to this court as part of her petition," I said. "Page 14 of her initial filing. It's a letter, allegedly written by my father, granting Diane broad powers over the trust. It's dated 3 months before his death and bears his signature." Curtis turned pale. He knew what was coming. I had that letter examined by a certified forensic document examiner, I continued. The examiner's report is in this folder. The signature is a digital copy. It was lifted from another document, a 2023 property tax return, and pasted into the letter using an image editing program. The PDF metadata for the letter shows it was created 4 days after my father's death on a computer registered to Curtis Hamley's law office. Curtis slammed his hand on the table. That is outrageous. I never. The letter is a forgery, I said, looking at Judge Alderman, submitted under oath to this court as part of a fraudulent guardianship petition. This isn't just theft, Your Honor. Under Texas Penal Code Section 3702, it's aggravated perjury. And under Section 324, it's a first-degree felony, obtaining a signature on a document by deception for over $300,000. Judge Alderman stared at Curtis for a long moment. Mr. Hamley, he said quietly, did you prepare this document? Curtis was sweating through his shirt. Dark patches were visible spreading under his arms. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The metadata bore his fingerprints. Diane turned on him instantly. He told me it would work, she hissed, pointing at Curtis. He said no one would ever check. It was his idea. Curtis flinched as if slapped. The alliance crumbled before our eyes. 2 thieves on a sinking boat, each trying to throw the other overboard. I didn't want this, Diane said, turning to the gallery. Her voice cracked. She tried to cry, but it wouldn't come. The mask had slipped too far. Robert was going to leave me with nothing after everything I did for him. 17 years I gave that man. I raised his daughter. I maintained his household. You embezzled his money, I said. This is what you embezzled. Judge Alderman raised his hand again. He took a deep breath, then spoke in the tone of a man delivering a decision he'd long ago made. The court finds no evidence of the respondent's mental incapacity. The petition for guardianship is denied without prejudice. Furthermore, the court is referring the matter of the forged document and fraudulent petition to the Harris County District Attorney for criminal investigation. He looked directly at Diane. Mrs. Calloway, I strongly advise you to secure separate criminal counsel. Mr. Hamley will not be able to represent you, as he apparently is a subject of the same investigation. He paused. And Miss Calloway, Jr.? Yes, Your Honor. You mentioned the transfers involved multiple jurisdictions. Shell companies in Wyoming, a brokerage account in Texas, a condo in Galveston funded through interstate bank transfers? Yes, Your Honor. He nodded slowly. Then I will also be referring this matter to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. This may qualify as interstate wire fraud. Diane's face went completely blank. Not angry, not scared. Blank. The emptiness of someone who had just realized the trap she'd set had actually been set for her. I sat back. My hands weren't shaking. My pulse was steady. I felt what you feel when you finish a marathon. Exhausted, but clear. As if every mile had been worth it, because finally you could stop running. The courtroom slowly cleared. Aunt Colette approached me in the hallway. She was crying. Sweetie, she said, I didn't know. She told us. She said you... I know what she told us, I replied. I wasn't angry at Colette. I understood. Narcissists don't just manipulate their victims. They manipulate the witnesses. They construct a reality so compelling that even good people get trapped in it. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. "Because I needed you to believe her," I said. "If you doubted her, she would have changed her plan. She needed a full audience. She needed everyone in that courtroom nodding along. That was the only way she would feel confident enough to go through with the petition. And the petition was the only thing that put the forgery into sworn court documents, where it becomes a criminal offense." Colette stared at me. "You planned all of this?" "I planned for the possibility," I said. "That's different." I walked out into the January sun. Houston winters are a strange thing. Cold enough for a jacket, but warm enough to remind you that spring is coming. I stood on the courthouse steps, taking the deepest breath I had managed in 14 months. 3 weeks later, Diane was indicted on 6 counts: embezzlement of an inheritance, forgery, aggravated perjury, obtaining a signature by false pretenses, money laundering, and 1 federal charge of wire fraud. Curtis Hamley faced 3 separate charges, including conspiracy and the falsification of a public record. Trevor Fisk, Diane's boyfriend, was named an accomplice but not charged. The Galveston apartment was seized. The brokerage account was frozen. Every dollar from the shell companies was returned to the trust. Diane made bail. She called me from a blocked number. I almost ignored it, but something urged me to hear her out. "You ruined my life," she said. Her voice was unnervingly level, devoid of tears or remorse, dripping only venom. "No, Diane," I replied. "You built your house on stolen land." I had simply presented the deed. She hung up. I blocked the number. Then I blocked 3 more that she tried over the next week. Narcissists don't quit when they lose. They just change their approach. But I refused to be a target any longer. I sold the lake house in Conroe. Part of the proceeds established a scholarship fund in my mother's name at her alma mater, A&M University. My mother was a first-generation college student. She would have found it meaningful to know her name was opening doors for other women. I kept the trust. I restructured it, fired the former financial advisor who had been far too cozy with Diane, and hired a fiduciary manager who answered only to me. I moved into a normal apartment. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a scruffy terrier mix I named Verdict, because I thought it was funny. My therapist said humor was a healthy coping mechanism. Colette and I had lunch once a month. It was awkward at first. She carried a heavy guilt for having believed Diane. But I shared my therapist's words. Guilt only helps when you transmute it into something else. Colette began volunteering at a legal aid clinic, assisting elderly victims of fraud. She was good at it. She could sit quietly with people who had been betrayed by someone they trusted. Perhaps because she now understood that feeling herself. The legal proceedings took 11 months. Diane accepted a plea deal to avoid a jury trial. She received 6 years in state custody and 2 years of supervised probation. Curtis received 3 years and was disbarred. Trevor Fisk cooperated with federal authorities and received 18 months of house arrest, which, given the federal forfeiture of his apartment, meant confinement to his mother's guest bedroom in Beaumont. There's a poetry to this ending that no writer could invent. On the day of the sentencing, I didn't attend. I didn't need to witness it, didn't need the courtroom closure. I had already received mine the day I stood up and opened that folder. Instead, I drove to my mother's grave. It's in a small cemetery in South Houston, beneath an evergreen oak that sheds acorns each fall. I sat on the grass and told her everything. I told her about the trust, about Diane, the forged signatures, about Verdict, the scruffy dog. I told her I missed her every single day, and that I was angry she wasn't here to see me stand up for myself. And then I told her something I had never voiced aloud to another soul. I told her that for 5 months, while I tracked Diane's thefts, while I gathered evidence, while I sat across from that woman at family dinners and smiled, I had been terrified every single day. I wasn't brave. Inside, I was shaking. I'd wake at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, wondering if I was making a mistake, wondering if she knew, wondering if my family would ever believe me. But I did it anyway. Not because I was fearless, but because I chose to. Fear is not a sufficient reason to let someone take what my father built and my mother blessed. People think strength is the absence of fear. It's not. Strength is knowing the person across from you is lying to your face and choosing to sit still, eat your dinner, and wait, because you know patience is the one weapon they never see coming. Diane was loud. I was quiet. She was fast. I was slow. She played to the crowd. I played to the evidence. And when the curtain finally fell, the audience realized they hadn't been watching the right character all along. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because right now, someone is sitting at their kitchen table at 2 a.m., staring at bank statements that don't add up, and wondering if they're losing their mind. You are not crazy. You are not paranoid. And you are not alone. Document everything. Tell no one. And when the time comes, walk into that room with your folder and steady hands and show them exactly who they underestimated. Peace is not something you wait for. It's something you build, page by page, in the folder they never see.